Knight, aka Lady Ash Knight of Book Catalot, and I'm here with my review for Court of Fives by Kate Elliot. I read this a few months ago and took a lot of notes for my review and then ended up never recording my review, so I'm doing it now because procrastination in my life needs to die a horrible flaming death in a moldy pit in the ground. So, Court of Fives is about this girl named Jessamy. Actually, let me back up. The reason I found out about Court of Fives was because apparently the CW, the TV channel, is doing a Little Women dystopian TV show at some point. And I really love Little Women. When I was 15, I ended up in the hospital for about a week, and my sleep schedule at the time was weird. I would be awake all night because this was during the summer, and I would stay up all night to watch the sun come up, and then I would sleep during the day. And my parents hated it, but it was the summer, and I was 15, and whatever. So then when I ended up in the hospital, there was nothing to do at night except watch movies, and so I ended up watching Little Women with what's her name, Winona Ryder, and Susan Sarandon, and Claire Danes, and Kirsten Dunst. They played three of the sisters, and then Susan Sarandon played the mom. Oh, and then Christian Bale was the friend, Teddy, which I remember thinking, I didn't realize that's who that was when I saw it, and then I remember thinking when I found out that's who that was, I was like, oh my god, that's so weird, because he's so young looking for most of the movie. He's probably like 20, but he's so young looking for most of the movie. And that started me really liking I really liked the movie, and so then I watched the one with Elizabeth Hepburn, and I really liked that one, and then I ended up reading the book, and I really liked it, and then I read Little Women and Werewolves, or no, yeah, I read Little Women and Werewolves and Little Vampire Women, and both of those were hilarious, and I loved them all. And so when I heard that Kate Elliot, who had done a bunch of other books, was doing Little Women meets the Hunger Games, I was like, what? Oh, I need to read this, because, I kind of like the Hunger Games. I don't hate the Hunger Games. So I was like, oh, I want to read this. Well, first of all, that description is totally wrong. Little Women, yes. Hunger Games, no. But that's what got me into the series. And so, because it is a series, it's a trilogy. The third book comes out, I think, in July. I've already pre-ordered it. And, so the book starts with Jessamy, who's the Jo March character, and she wants to be an athlete. Her dad is what's called a patron. Okay, let me back this up even further. So the world building here, a lot of people complain about the world building because they say they don't understand it. They don't understand how it meshes together and why there are these conflicts in this world and why there's this class system. And what it is that the world, I guess maybe because I read a lot of historical fiction, I recognize the world for what it was. It is a fantasy version of Egypt when it was being occupied by Rome. And so, using real world terms, then what you have is Jessamy's dad is a Roman commander, and her mom is an Egyptian commoner. And so because of that, they can't get married, but her dad has kept her mom as his mistress. He's never married, and everyone treats her like the lady of the house. He takes her out in public and presents her as his lady. He's very obviously not ashamed of her or the 4 children that she has given him. He demands that his people respect her and treat her like a Roman, even though she's not Roman. And which is a really, really big deal, I think. But the other problem is the dad is really ambitious. So, how this applies to the plot. So you have Jo, Beth, Meg, and Amy. Those are not their actual names, but we're just going to go with that for now because those are the names of the characters in Little Women. And Jo, Jessamy, Jo wants to be an athlete and compete in this game called the Fives. And the Fives are sort of like the Olympics, except they happen way more often. And that's where people probably got the whole Little Women meets the Hunger Games, except you don't compete in these games and then die. You could get hurt if you're not careful, but that applies to like every sport that ever was ever, pretty much, except maybe chess. But she wants to be an athlete and compete in these sports. And now here's where I think this is interesting. This book really examines intersectionality. Intersectionality is when you have different types of privilege interacting with different types of prejudice. So the thing is that Jessamy is a half Roman, half Egyptian woman whose father is a noble. This is important because that is what keeps her from being able to compete in the Fives. because I don't know why, but for some reason this would look bad on her dad. It wouldn't cause like a whole lot of problems. It's not against the law or anything. It's more of a status thing. Her dad would be made to look foolish if she competed in the fives. So she's been competing in secret. Um, Now the reason I talk about intersectionality is because it's interesting. If she was a man and had the same heritage, noble Roman father, commoner Egyptian mom, she could compete. If she was a woman and fully Egyptian, she could compete. If she was a woman and fully Roman, she could compete. If she was a woman, half Egyptian, half Roman, and her dad was not a noble, she could compete. And so while on the one hand she has all of these luxuries because her dad is a noble and he has a lot of money and a lot of prestige because he is a general in the army, on the other hand, that doesn't mean that she has everything. It's like this idea that like just because somebody's rich means that they have everything going for them. There are prejudices against different groups of people, regardless of the privileges that they have. And so I think that I thought that was really interesting because it was handled really well. Um, and Jessamy, also as the daughter of a noble Roman, actually has a lot of privilege that she doesn't even realize she has until she starts dealing more openly with the Egyptian commoners. And then she realizes that she's actually been shielded and protected from a lot of bad things that happen to girls in her relative situation because of her dad's position in the Roman court. The point of the book, though, is that she ends up becoming friends with the Teddy character. Teddy in the original Little Women was this rich boy who moved in next door to the March family and ended up befriending all four of the girls. He was very lonely because he didn't have any friends, and so even though he was a boy and he was rich, he enjoyed being friends with these poor female, these poor teenage girls, even though at the time of the book, this was pretty frowned upon. So Jess meets this boy named Kaliarkos, and it's basically the same kind of power dynamic. And they both want to compete in the fives, but the thing is that Kaliarkos is like the great nephew of the Empress or something, and so it's a big deal because, once again, going with intersectionality and, social constraints and class issues, because he is so high up there and he's in line for the throne, he actually is supposed to be going into the army and becoming a war leader, not trying to be an athlete. And the book is not like super complex, but it turns out that the thing with the fives is not the only thing going on in the book, which is what I thought was going on. She has to deal with Kaliarkos' scheming uncle who's trying to ruin her family's lives because he doesn't like her dad, and her family ends up getting split apart because her dad's patron ends up dying, and so he has to get a new patron, and the new patron doesn't approve of her mom, and so makes her dad put her mom aside and get married to somebody else. And then to make sure, but everyone knows that this guy, that Jessamy's dad, is madly in love with her mom. Everyone knows this. And so then the guy who's trying to force her dad to marry somebody else tries to kill her mom and her siblings, and her mom is pregnant at this point. And also there's this whole thing about how male children are still prized over female children, and so it's like a big deal when you find out that the mom is pregnant with a boy because they've always wanted a boy, and that's like a big deal. And if she can have a boy, that would even elevate her status even beyond the fact, which would help with the fact that she's an Egyptian commoner, because apparently, even though it's against the law, like that would still give her more status as an Egyptian commoner mistress of a Roman noble to have given him a son than a Roman noble wife who has not borne any children. Which it's like a really interesting, like the power dynamics and the political dynamics and social and caste structures, really the way they interchange and interact with each other is really interesting in this book. And I think it's actually kind of impressive because this book is not very long. It's not like super short, but it's not like the size of Twilight or City of Bones. There are some things that I didn't like. Her dad, it's really hard to get a gauge on her dad, Jessamy's dad, at the beginning. You can't really tell at first whether he really loves his kids or not, because on the one hand, he does some really important things that really like make it difficult for him to be out in society, like keeping an Egyptian mistress and treating her like his wife. Also, he has one of his daughters has a clubbed foot, and in Roman society, in this version of Roman society, and at different times in actual Roman society, children who were born with handicaps were killed when they were babies, and he refused to let them kill his daughter because he loved her, and that's a big deal. But at the same time, he is very rigid in how he wants his children to behave. When he thinks that Jessamy did something inappropriate, he slaps her, which I was like, dude, not okay. But at the same time, I mean, considering the historical context of the world, most parents actually probably would have like beat their kids. So at the same time, he showed kind of restraint. But looking at it from a modern sensibility, you don't slap your kids for talking to the wrong person. That's stupid. So, I'm a little conflicted about the dad, and also, but I think actually the author wanted that to be that way, because the dad is not a good person. He's not a bad person. He's not evil. He's not a villain, but he's not a good person. And Jessamy's relationship with her dad is really conflicted, and I like the way that it's portrayed in the book. The other thing I like is that the Amy character, who's called Amalia is a lesbian. And you don't realize that because for most of the book, she's like, yeah, I want to get married and I want to do this thing and elevate myself in society. Oh, they also talk about, sorry, this is relevant to the thing about Amalia. They talk about colorism in this book, which for those who don't know, colorism is basically how society and treats people differently based on what color their skin is, regardless of what their race is. So, like, as an example, I'm mixed race. I'm about 45% black, 40% white, and 15% Native American. Depending on where I live, I can pass for white. Apparently, I've been told this. I've never been able to do it, but some people tell me, yeah, you could totally pass for white. And I'm like, okay, well, not where I used to live, whatever. But because of that, someone who could pass for white is going to be treated differently, regardless of whether they are white. If they're not white, if they're biracial or very light-skinned African American / black / whatever, but they could pass for white, they're going to be treated differently in a lot of cases than somebody who couldn't pass, regardless of whether or not they have the same genetic background. An example of this would be me and my brother. My brother he couldn't pass for white, and part of that is because of the way his hair looks. His nose is a little more prominent than mine. I don't think anyone has ever mistaken him for being a white person. And he's never deliberately tried to go undercover or whatever and pass for white. But so he has been treated differently than I have at times. And we have friends who are also biracial who look more biracial or more non-white than we do, and look less non-white than we do. And we're all treated differently depending on the situation that we're in. So what this has to do with Amalia. It turns out, so the 4 girls in the family, Jessamy, Amalia, and then I forget what the other 2 girls' names are because I always refer to them in my head from the Little Women names. So basically Jo, Amy, Beth, and Meg, all 4 of them they're split down the middle with whether they could pass for Roman or not. Jessamy cannot pass for Roman. Amalia can. Meg can't pass for Roman, but Beth can. Or maybe it's the other way around, because they're secondary characters, so I don't really remember. The reason this is important is because Amalia actually, the one who doesn't have the physical handicap can pass for Roman, but because she has a physical handicap, she cannot get married. The Amalia is beautiful and looks Roman, so she's like their jewel. Everyone in their family and among their servants has been trying to get her to get married because it's a way to accumulate status for the family, and she's the only one of them that can get married. And so the reason this is a thing is that she wants to get married, and the whole book almost, she's talking about how her chances of getting married, and she's like talking about matrimonial politics and all this stuff, and then you find out the reason she wants to get married is because it is socially acceptable, although they don't talk about it, it is socially acceptable for lesbians to marry men and then pick up female lovers. And she's in love with a Roman girl, a noble girl who's a friend of hers, and the 2 of them have this plan to find 2 guys who are, friends with each other and who are nice so that the 2 of them can marry these guys and then be lovers. And I think that's really interesting. And especially because you don't know about it until near the end, and Jessamy finds out, and it's like, okay, like, why did the author wait until near the end of the book to put this in. Well, actually, it's because one of the things they're trying to bring up is the fact that Jessamy is a little self-involved and only hasn't noticed. She never noticed that Amalia and Amalia's friend had a thing for each other, but once you see the two of them together, it's really obvious. And again, that goes with the privilege thing. Jessamy never thinks about the issues that other people might be having because of the marginalization that they are experiencing that is separate from the marginalization she experiences. It's really an interesting book, and it's done, I think, very deftly. I think there could have been a little more explanation and character development just a little bit with some of the secondary characters, but I really like how, without being preachy, the author addresses privilege and intersectionality and what it means to be, a person of color without without like shoehorning in on things that they shouldn't be talking about. Now, I want to address something here, though, talking about race and intersectionality and prejudice and all of that stuff. I think that this book has not been very well received. And I think part of that is, without these people meaning to, a lot of the negative reviews that I read on Goodreads were kind of racist in nature. And, it's very easy for me to say that and then have somebody else be like, oh, well, if anyone disagrees with you, you can just be like racism and then everything is fixed. And that's not what I'm trying to say, so let me explain. A lot of people, one I've noticed that some people didn't pick up on the fact that Jessamy competing in the fives is actually not that big of a deal, because her dad makes it a big deal. But they make it so then some people have gotten the impression that because she competes in the fives, that is what causes all the problems for her family, and that's not true. What causes all the problems is her dad's patron dies. Yes, her dad is upset that she is competing in the fives, but actually her competing in the fives is one of the things that saves their family from complete and total ruin. And a lot of the people who wrote these negative reviews, and there are a lot of negative reviews for this book, have said that they find it kind of stupid and petty that Jessamy wants to go to the fives instead of just sitting back and enjoying the fact that her dad, spends all this money and time on her because her dad's like super rich. And so they're like, oh, boo-hoo, this poor, rich girl wants to compete in this super dangerous sport, and then boo-hoos about the fact that she can't because she's rich. Well, that's not even it at all, though, because it has nothing to do with the fact that she's rich. It has everything to do with the fact that she is a mixed woman of color. And I think either, I don't know if people just didn't get it or if they're not processing it that way, but that is literally, they say that is why she cannot compete. The whole point of her character's motivation is that she wants to compete in a game where the law says because of her gender and her race, she cannot compete. She wants to be an athlete, and everyone who's saying, she should just suck it up and deal with the fact that she can't be an athlete, it's like you're basically telling this girl, because she's biracial, she can't be an athlete, and that should be okay with her. And that's not okay. Like, I don't understand how anyone would ever think that was okay. That is a terrible, terrible thing. That's like saying because you're black, you can't be an athlete. Like, who would say that to somebody? And I don't know, I just have a lot of issues with the way this book was received. Because I think it's unintentional. I don't think that these people are really looking at it in the way that I have just expressed it, but that's really what they're saying, and I don't think they realize that that's what they're saying. Anyway, so I really like this book. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. The only reason I didn't give it 5 stars was because, again, it could have been longer and done like a little more world building and a little more character development for other characters, and that would have been really cool. I will say, and the plot wasn't very twisty, but also I don't feel that I'm like a super good judge of that, because I'm really good at spotting plot twists like 10 miles away. So, but I would recommend this book. I think it's great. I love seeing books with biracial protagonists. I love seeing books that are not preachy, that deal with how difficult it can be to be biracial, because I had a hell of a time when I was a kid, because I grew up in the South, and having a black dad and a white mom was a huge deal. And then when people found out that I was 15% Native American, it got even worse. So, I think that this book is really cool, and I think more people should read it, and I think that people need to kind of maybe reevaluate how they're looking at it. So, I realized I didn't, like, jump around and get, like, super passionate and start yelling and cussing like I do sometimes in my reviews, but, I actually have given this review a lot of thought. And so I've kind of smoothed out a lot of my angst about it. But yeah, I really think everyone should read it. So thank you guys for listening. And again, this is Quarter Fives by Kate Elliot, and this is LA Knight, aka Lady Ash Knight of Book Catalot. Please like, comment, subscribe. Let me know what you think. Have you guys read this book? Do you want to read this book? What do you guys think of Little Women? Do you have a favorite version of Little Women that you have read or seen? Who's interested in the CW dystopian Little Women show? I think it was The Onion, or maybe it was the Mary Sue, did a really interesting like supposition story about what they think the show might be like. And if I can find it, I will link it below. Anyway, let me know what you guys think. And I will talk to you guys in the next podcast. Bye. Bye. Bye.